Hello, and thanks for joining us on the Creative Lunch Hour in partnership with Glug Events. My name is Ben Mottershead, and today I'm joined by DJ, radio presenter, and bassist of Primal Scream, Simone Marie Butler. As well as playing bass for one of the most legendary rock bands in British music history, Simone also hosts her own radio show, Naked Lunch, on Soho Radio every Wednesday from 12 till 2 p.m, DJs at clubs and festivals across Europe, and has played and recorded with artists including James Williams of the Stooges and Faris Badwan of The Horrors. Simone, thanks for chatting with me today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Not a problem. So for anyone listening, Simone will also be answering a live Q&A right after this interview finishes. So make sure to visit the Mediatel Twitter and use the hashtag Creative Lunch Hour to take part. So Simone, can you briefly tell the listeners out there about yourself? They may be aware of obviously Primal Scream, but maybe not so much aware of what else you have going on in your life. So do you just want to briefly talk us through where you've come from and what you're doing now?
Well, that's a long answer. Thank you for the intro, by the way. That was a pretty well explained intro, I guess. I've been playing bass for Primal Scream. This year it'll be 8 years. I think for anyone who knows the band, you can imagine it's a bit of a dream job as a musician, and being able to tour the world and play all kinds of festivals and support the Rolling Stones at Glastonbury, all kinds of amazing stuff. I think for anyone who's a musician or has any kind of affiliation or interest or passion for music, it doesn't really stop at one instrument, and I really enjoy DJing out, and I've played festivals, like you said, and supported bands and all kinds of stuff, and that kind of feeds into the radio show I do as well. I think because when I was young, I had this dream of like having my own record label. I kind of still want to do that at some point as well. Have my own label, and the radio show has been a way of me purposefully discovering new music, with the focus of it being me being able to share that new music on a radio show. And I, because it's internet, it goes out all over the world, and all those shows get put onto Mixcloud so you can listen back. So it's really nice to be able to develop a kind of community all over the world, and just sharing music, and that's kind of why I do it, and then on the flip side, I get to play this amazing music out live as well, and I get to collaborate with other bands and musicians, which is also really, really exciting, and I feel really lucky to be able to do.
Do you feel like the different ventures you're part of now kind of really benefit each other? And is that always a kind of intention with what you do, or do you just kind of go where you actually think you're going to go to where you enjoy most, so to speak?
Yeah, there is that instinctive thing, I think, but you do have to remain focused as well. My main focus is music and the band and playing. Like, my main focus has always been trying to improve as a musician and trying to work hard as a musician and understand what that journey is, understand I guess, it's like an ever evolving thing when you're playing. You can never know enough, you can never learn enough, and I'm really lucky to be able to do that in the context of Primal Scream at the moment as well. So it does all feed in. I think you've just got to kind of consciously manage your instincts in that sense, rather than just kind of willy-nilly flit around doing one thing here and one thing there and another thing there. I think it makes it more enjoyable for you to be able to tie up those creative things with some kind of vision. I try to do that, but that sounds a little bit pretentious, to be honest, but in a way it all sort of feeds into one thing. The more new music I find, the more I get inspired by different players and different styles of music, and then the more I want to share that and play stuff out or put things on the radio show. And then sometimes I'll interview a guest and we'll end up collaborating and working together. And it's really inspiring to interview people on the show as well, and just get different angles of different musicians and stuff like that.
So while we're kind of on this topic of being inspired and inspiring people. Can you talk a little bit about your early life? I read in an interview that your father was a musician or a
Mm,
guitarist.
yeah.
So I just wondered, was music always kind of a really big inspiration for you growing up? And actually, where did you grow up?
I grew up in a relatively small area of North London, sort of between Enfield and Edmonton. Um, and yeah, I think I didn't think of music being an inspiration. I don't think you do when you're a kid. You don't think how inspired you are. You just know that you really love something. You don't really question it in the way that you do when you're older. Music was definitely always a world that I kind of wanted to veer into. I didn't know how. I knew I wanted to. Well, you say do music, but what does that really mean? I mean, I knew I wanted to be in music. I either wanted to make music videos, or I think at one point I wanted to dance in music videos. I wanted to be in a band. I definitely wanted to be on top of the pops. I definitely wanted to perform music. And yeah, my dad was a musician. He was in a band called the Honeycombs for a while. And I mean, the first house we grew up in, some of his old bandmates would, not from that band, but another band after that he was in, would come round, and there would, you know, like that kind of whole environment of guys with bell bottoms and beards and like smoking and drinking and stuff. I kind of um I liked that, you know. I kind of, I don't know, there was something synonymous with that kind of vibe and the music industry, I guess, which is such a cliche. But we would, my dad always encouraged me, and my mum always encouraged me, like with music and stuff. And I sort of taught myself some piano, and I played classical music at school. Like I played sort of flute and violin, and was in orchestras, and then was doing like my first concert of mine when I was about 13, I think. So really enjoyed playing, like just playing instruments when I was a kid.
When did you kind of take that and that next stage then to actually start doing music professionally and like with like first gigs, first recordings, collaborations? When did that point in your life appear?
Kind of later, really, in my 20s after I left school. I really felt very lost when I left school. I
Mm.
thought I wanted to go into art. I wanted to be an artist. I really loved doing art at A level, and I still loved music. But just wasn't sure what to do. I think, like a lot of young people, not even just of my generation, of any generation, it's always hard. You know, you panic if you don't know what you want to do when you're 18 for the rest of your life. And how can you? You know, how how can you? And I think realizing just how competitive the music industry was, I sort of started to, you know, just feel like, God, how can anyone make a living out of this unless you're some mega pop star who gets, super rich? Um, but I picked up a bass. I thought I was going to play guitar first. I mean, the first thing I did really was start DJing, and then I started getting gigs through that, and started to get a few paid gigs, which was kind of mind blowing to me, because I never considered myself a DJ in the sense that, these true icons of music are DJs. So I kind of did it for fun, and then thought to myself, "Well, I'm going to try and learn guitar." My dad came around and tried to give me a few lessons, and I was like, "It's not working." I just didn't feel it, And there are a plethora of guitar players out there. Unless you're doing something unique and different, just do it as a hobby kind of thing. So, and then I started playing bass. I picked up a bass. I went down to Denmark Street and bought my first Washburn bass, this XB 400 thing. It was like a lead weight, and I took it home, and I just kind of fell in love with it, you know. And yeah,
Well, you briefly kind of spoke then, about this idea that when you were 18, you didn't really know what you wanted to do. You got kind of into professional music in your sort of 20s. But I was just curious as to what did you have an array of kind of what you would class as maybe normal jobs that weren't really actually related or within the music
yeah.
industry? I know you ran a music shop at one point.
I did run a music shop. Yeah, I mean, I was scared of having a. Okay, well, this sounds a little bit sort of pretentious, but I was scared of having a boring life. I was scared of not having adventure, and I was scared of not having challenges, and I mean, obviously, I was a deep overthinker, in my early years, and I still am. But I kind of and didn't want to work in an office. I didn't want to be unhappy. I wanted I don't know. I remember working like when I was 16, 17, a bit at Sony Music, and it was such an eye opener. Oh my god, I came from the safety of my house to being at after parties with Robert De Niro and Terence Trent D'Arby and all these kind of things, and I kind of felt the presence of that exhilaration of that world, and I was quite dazzled by it. And what with my dad being in the band, and I'd actually gone to Top of the Pops a few times and seen performers, and I was the kid sitting at home recording videos of the chart show and recording Top of the Pops and making mixtapes from the radio, pressing play and record at the same time. It's like I really dreamt of it, I think, and I think like I said before, it's not like I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I just knew that I wanted to do something like that.
Kind of interesting because obviously a lot of Glug's like audience are from the world of kind of branding and design, and normally that just involves working on product and surface services, etc. But in music, the artist is more often than not the actual brand itself. So, in is there actually a Simone Marie brand? Like in your sort of, have you built a brand over your kind of journey, etc.?
I guess there's two sides to the branding thing. There's what you intentionally and consciously put out, and then there's how the other side, like, there's how the public or your onlookers view you, and there's that kind of discrepancy in the middle. And I haven't actively put out a brand, but I think as I go along, and I was having this discussion with someone the other day, there's no harm in actually doing that. There's no harm in kind of harnessing the things that are characteristically you to make it more digestible to the outside world. If anything, I avoided that for a long time. Like, I avoided having a website. I just didn't want it. I just thought, I don't want to be seen as trying to be a personality. I just want to play music. But I think it just helps you in, like, it goes back to what we were saying about bringing the creative threads together. I think it helps you focus on things, and I think it helps other people place you, and actually it helps with someone who might be looking for a bass player, or someone who might be looking for something. You're easily recognizable, and I think in this day of being very kind of business savvy and very self-sufficient, and the whole thing about the big labels are much less necessary in this current state of play. I think the emphasis is on smaller independent labels and artists being much more in touch with their immediate following. That is the way it is now anyway. So I think, if anything, um am I aware of a Simone Marie brand? It's kind of in the making, I suppose. I mean, I want to do so much more. It's like I want to achieve so much more, work with so many other people, and I have so many more ideas of what I want to do and where I want to go. So I think um being able to encapsulate that in one kind of brand, it would help me as much as it would help anyone else. So
Because is there
yeah.
something that you've noticed as being the biggest change in the last sort of couple of decades in terms of how you actually promote yourself and how you craft this kind of individual brand? Because we have
Mhm.
gone through a massive technological leap
Yeah,
even in just in the last decade since you obviously joined Primal Scream in 2012. So
definitely.
has it been, what's been the most noticeable difference in how you kind of have to do that?
um Well, I get, see, the thing is, I'm not a solo artist in the sense that, there are bands out there and artists and songwriters and performers who would need to
Yeah,
rely on this in a much more heavy manner, and rightly so. And the things with labels, having that identity, and bands and performers, like I say. Uh, I guess the thing I've noticed the most is that need to kind of be unique and different and stand out from the crowd. And Um, I guess it's a fine line between sort of interacting and over interacting, and making yourself too available but being available. And it's like when you think of like the days of Bowie or Hendrix, it's like you can't imagine them being on Twitter or Instagram and sharing so much of themselves. And we're in an age where, if anything, people do overshare, and I think it's that the blurring of those lines is something that has to be watched, I think. The blurring of your professional life and your personal life. People maybe subsidizing their personal life to trade into their professional life. I think I've seen that. I've seen people become much more involved in an artist or band's personal things, and artists and bands sharing a lot more personal things, which is a modern, I would say, more of a modern happening rather than something that was happening 10 years ago.
Because how have you sort of continued to develop creatively then, in terms of, you obviously you were saying then about the kind of way in which people present themselves has developed and evolved quite substantially, and how they have had to adapt. But how have you, as an individual musician and a professional, actually continued to develop that sort of craft?
I think as a musician, you are constantly developing and evolving it naturally anyway. You have to. It's like I was saying, like you never stop learning. That's the thing about picking up an art form or an instrument, or whether you're a writer or an actor or an artist or a fashion designer or an architect, anything like that. I think the world is your inspiration, and all the people that went before you are your inspiration, and your collaborators are your inspiration, and the trailblazers are your inspiration. I think that's got nothing to do with, in a sense, what era or what decade you're necessarily operating within. I think, as you, I don't know, how do I develop? I just think the need to want to be better, it has to kind of be at the forefront. The need to not want to just kind of stagnate, or just assume that you're going to always remember everything, or assume that you don't have to, keep practicing, or that you don't have to keep testing yourself. I'm a big believer in the whole thing that, not to quote Barry again, but or mention Barry again, but when he was saying, when you're out of your comfort zone is when you're learning the most and you're really alive. And I think it's really important to do that, to kind of kick your own ass and kind of put yourself, especially in music, because it moves so fast, and you think you're learning, but you're not really learning until you're really slightly almost out of your depth. And you can do all the theory, all the lessons, all the studying, but like when you're working with other people who are maybe better or more proficient, I should say, or more experienced, or have a few more miles musically on the clock than you, that's when that exchange of knowledge starts to happen, and that's when real confidence grows as well.
Well, you've obviously been with Primal Scream since 2012, and I
Mm.
believe you can correct me on this if I'm wrong, but you were involved in two studio albums, More Lights in 2013 and Chaos Moses in 2016.
Not really the studio stuff, it's
Oh,
more,
okay.
more kind of yeah, we do bits in the studio. I did some stuff with them for Record Store Day, but Bobby and Andrew have their own methods, and sometimes they'll bring other people in. It's if you think of a kind of funkadelic Parliament thing where every album is a kind of a totally different vibe. If you look at every single Scream album, it's completely different. It's
Yeah.
the Scream, but they've never made the same album twice.
So what's that journey been like then? Obviously, have the what would you say have been the major kind of highs and lows to obviously forming with the Scream and over the last sort of eight years?
Oh my god, it's just been a whole ton of highs. Really, not many lows at all. I mean, I would say the lowest is maybe right now where we are now, where we've had to cancel shows, just like every other band musician. This is probably the least favourable time. But some of the highs. I mean, every time we get to go on tour is such a blast. And every time we do anything, whether it's a TV show or festivals or anything like that. And I mean, definitely one of the highs I mentioned was uh, playing before the Rolling Stones at Glastonbury. That was the first year I'd ever even been to Glastonbury, and I was playing on the pyramid stage with one of my most adored bands. So that was quite surreal. Um, I think another high was playing the Teenage Cancer Trust show a few years back as well. That's a really incredible that's when you really things like that is when you feel the real exchange between music and the public and how you can really have an impact. Because during the day, you spend the whole day there. It's not just you do a show and then you go home and that's it. You spend the whole day there and you meet the kids who are in remission, and are recovering from their chemo. Some of them are, still going through that process of getting treatment, and they're all sectioned into groups of what their favorite instrument is. And you got a group like drums, so Darren would spend time with them. You got a group that want to sing, Bobby would spend time with them and working on lyrics and stuff. And there was one boy who had a bass guitar, and I spent some time with him, chatting about his treatment, and picked up the bass, and his mum was there, and it was just, I mean, these kids can redefine bravery. It was really, really, like my heart is in my throat just thinking about it. And then that afternoon, they write a song in the style of band that are playing that night. So they went away and they wrote this song. Um, Sounded like a little bit like moving on up, that kind of sort of gospel type thing. And then we got invited back in and they performed it for us. And it was just amazing.
Well, it's interesting because obviously you've got that side of it, which is like this very rewarding side that allows you to get involved in very meaningful and actually uplifting projects. But obviously, a lot of outsiders looking into the industry would sort of look at the music industry as being renowned for its kind of party sector, and like rock and roll is supposed to be the apex of that, and touring as a rock and roll artist is the apex of that apex. How do you kind of maintain your sanity, your health, your well-being in such a demanding environment? Is it? I imagine. Has it got easier as you've sort of got a bit older?
Yeah, I think as you get older, you naturally want to take care of yourself more. Whereas, like, in your 20s, I guess you have less responsibility, and you think less about the future and your own physical health because you feel pretty damn indestructible. And I think just doing what we do, playing music, or and this is for DJs as well. This is for actors. This is for anyone who doesn't have that regular structured 9 to 5 thing where they go to a place, report to somebody, do work, go home. There's like a clocking on and clocking off element to it. I think there is no clocking on or off with things like this. And I think that in itself presents a kind of need for self-discipline and to look after yourself, and that the fluctuating workloads, it's not a constant. You do have to kind of hustle and make things happen. There's no guarantee. I mean, just by the pure situation we're all in. I mean, we're all affected by this, but you know, um, just by the fact that everyone's had all their gigs cancelled and stuff. I mean, um, you, the whole thing with the rock and roll and the touring and stuff. I mean, the way that people digest that kind of I won't say illusion, but that kind of ethos of it. That's a lot to do with how rock and roll music is reflected through the art forms, through photography, through fashion, through films, through documents. I mean, documentaries. Um, do you know what I mean? It's kind of seeps into every art form, and then we see it in front of our eyes, and we take that in as culture, and we take that in as legendary stuff. And yeah, it all happened, but I think in the reality of the day-to-day touring, it's just hard work.
So if we're going from the kind of the main stage to the studio now, I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about Soho Radio because you've been there since the start. What is that? Must be such a different world compared to actually touring.
Oh yeah, 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 for sure. Yeah, it's a much more kind of stable platform, I guess. I always really wanted to have a radio show, but not like I wanted to be a radio presenter. I didn't want that. I just wanted to be able to have a platform to play music. I always thought it was cool.
Mm.
I sort of would make these mixtapes when I was a kid and sort of pretend I had a radio show, and it's great. It's really good. It's been a great opportunity for me to learn what works and what doesn't work, and get an insight into the world of radio that I really didn't have before.
Yeah, because how do you see the future of radio progressing in like the current age?
I think it will. I mean, it's going a lot like, I guess, the big. Mm, I don't know. There are the big commercial radio stations out there which will always
Mm.
serve a purpose, and they're huge companies. You can't deny that. But I think, if anything, the growth of smaller stations and the growth of internet radio um, is definitely going to become more of a thing. It already has become more of a thing. I think internet radio can attract presenters and music fans in a way that other stations can't. Because you'll get musicians with their own radio show, and you'll get, like, well-known guitarists or singers with their own radio show. I think most people do have their own radio show now these days. It's like everyone's got
Yeah.
a podcast or everyone's got a radio show.
Well, I think that's the thing because there's someone made a point the other day saying that the podcast is the 2020 equivalent of the lower back tattoo.
You mean a tramp stamp?
Yeah, yeah, it's like
Go on, say it.
it's the sort of it's the millennial equivalent now of actually having the lower back tattoo from the 90s because everyone's just
Yeah.
doing one.
I think people are recognizing it, whether it's a podcast or radio. I think definitely podcasts have grown insanely. One of the kind of sort of trailblazers of that, I think, is Scroobius Pip.
Yeah.
Has one of the most successful podcasts out there, Distraction Piece podcast, and they're brilliant. They're absolutely brilliant, and lots of comedians have them, lots of presenters have them, and it's a chance for people to do things their way and not have the constraints of, or the red tape of
Mm.
other radio stations. So I think that's going to keep on growing, and I think the internet radio platform will merge into other media platforms as well, and other companies, and I think they'll have much more presence, and be far more influential, than they were in the last sort of 5 or 6 years or so. I mean, if you look back on the days of pirate radio, and then look at, kind of fast forward a few years from now, the underground always comes up. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's more than happened for internet radio, and it also provides this kind of base or a springboard for younger bands where they might not be able to get in touch with, your Six Music or your Radio X or something like that, but they can definitely touch base with people like Soho Radio or other stations, and it becomes a sort of breeding ground for new emerging talent. So I think it's great. I support it massively. I support so many new bands coming up, and I think it's really important to do that. Really important to have that level underneath commercial stations,
Mm.
and digital, not just commercial stations, but digital platform stations that are still very significantly placed. In terms of radio, that are kind of harder to get on. So yeah.
So with that kind of in mind, what's coming up for you then when we actually finally get out of sort of lockdown, etc.? What's happening with the sort of radio, the touring, etc.? Is there anything planned at the moment, or are you just kind of taking it a day at a time?
Can't say too much, really. I mean, we don't know, and no band knows right now. That's all I'll say. Of course, it's easier for bigger festivals to book bands for the same date in 2021 than it is to restart rearranging things for the end of the year. It's just chaos, and no one knows what travel restrictions are going to be, and it's very much up in the air. So no one can really comment on gigs or festivals. With regards to radio shows, I'm still doing my radio show. I'm doing it from home and sending it in every week. And in fact, I'm doing extra shows, and it's given me a chance because I've got all this free time. I'm sitting at home practicing bass a lot, which is great, and listening to a whole load of music, and everyone's doing a whole lot of tidying as well, which is good. And everyone's going to also come out probably looking like Bigfoot by the end of it because no one's can get a haircut. um, but yeah, I'm still doing the radio show, and I still get that part of the music industry where people are still releasing stuff. Pluggers are still sending, promo stuff to DJs and radio. I'm still getting all that. People are still sending me music. Everyone's out there still kind of being creative, even though that's like such a cliche right now because nobody feels creative. There's an element of like fake positivity, and yeah, artists should be have all this time to make art and be creative. It's like, do you know what? I think Nick Cave summed it up. Um, he did a piece talking about this, and normally he would be writing an opera, or he would be planning another tour, or maybe writing a film, or curating an exhibition or something. As he is just such a prolifically creative entity, And then halfway through, it's kind of like, do you know what? No, now is the time to rest and take stock. Professionally, personally, in all areas of our life, relationships, all kinds of stuff. So I think a balance between the two is good. People shouldn't feel pressure to suddenly release their opus, because let's face it, a month ago feels like about 6 months ago. So I think it's important to just do as much as we can of what we were doing before, within reason.
Well, with that does bring us to the end of the Q&A. I think that was a poetic point to end on. But for anyone listening, Simone will be doing a live Q&A in just a few minutes. So make sure to get your questions submitted, that should have been, via the MediaTel News Twitter feed using the hashtag Creative Lunch Hour. But until that moment, thank you so much for joining us on the Creative Lunch Hour, Simone. It's been really great just hearing all your points around kind of music and just your own progression. It's great to see you're doing so much.
Thank you for having me, and I look forward to the Q&A, and stay well, everyone.
Welcome to the Creative Lunch Hour Q&A with Simone Marie Butler. Your questions have been pouring in via the hashtag Creative Lunch Hour, and there is still time to get more in if you want to ask Simone something. Simone, welcome. Just had an amazing podcast by you, streamed live to the MediaTel audience. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Hi, everyone.
All good. Okay, cool. So obviously for everyone who is watching, we are on a live stream from our lovely homes. There may be a bit of interference, but try not to panic. It's normal in the current circumstance. So Simone, I'm going to get right into the questions with you. We only have 9 minutes remaining, so I want to obviously pick your brain as best we can. So let me just quickly get a few of those up for you. 1 second. So the first question. In the assumption we might miss out on live gigs for many more months due to the social distancing rules, and what would you be keen to stream? Fitness is a bit weird, really poor. Would you be keen to stream gigs instead if there is the social distancing rules that apply for many, many months?
Yeah, I mean, I think logistically these things have to be worked out really well. I mean, if I was to do it in the context of the band, we'd all have to I mean, you're talking about not just one person, it's a whole, there are many kind of elements and variables involved. But I mean, of course I'd be happy to do things on any medium that continue getting live music across. I've seen people doing it already. I've seen people do people who are isolated together. Obviously in a band situation you'd have to get like 4 or 5 different people in their rooms with their instruments, with their amps, all of those things considering, I would be up for it. Of course it would be pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think it's definitely something that I'm seeing a lot more of. So moving on to the next question, how do you balance, and what is the actual balance between your time spent playing, live music and actually doing your Soho Radio show as well?
My priority is band and live music and playing and becoming a better musician. My priority is always that. And the radio thing, I've always kind of done on the side of that, and it's part of my interest in music anyway, but it all kind of feeds into the same place, so to speak. So there are times when it sort of crosses over, but how do I divide my time? I mean, I put basically like a day aside for the show, or an afternoon to put the show together, and then during the week I'm listening to demos and radio, constantly listening, like it's all coming in bits and pieces for the radio show. But when I'm on tour, I kind of have to leave that a bit, and I just concentrate on shows and live gigs, and I kind of change tracks. When I'm away and on tour and don't have so many live shows, I can concentrate on the radio a bit more. But I think it's that thing where the more you do, the more you make time for. So
that actually kind of takes us nicely into a question that was asked by Steve Scafardi, which was, in your opinion, what would you deem to be the best era, or rock bands from the late 80s, early 90s, or rock bands today?
Oh God, the late 80s and 90s is quite specific. I think if we're talking rock bands, I'd probably go back to the 60s and 70s. But What was the question? What do I prefer?
Oh, so in terms of like, the best era of rock bands from the late 80s, early 90s today, is there like an era that really stands out in your mind?
For me, like I would the 70s, really, like late 60s, 70s, I would say, era wise for rock music. But there are incredible live bands now, and a lot of the bands that were around in 80s and 90s are still going now. And if you think like bands like Depeche Mode or Ride, they're more significant now than than they've ever been. They're more brilliant live than they've ever been. Or even bands like the OCs are just unbelievable live, unbelievable. I think every era has its incredible bands, really. And I think that the more distance there is from that kind of golden era, it's like the more you can revere these big bands that happened in the 60s and 70s and 80s, really.
Do you feel kind of...
I'm sorry.
That's right. Do you feel that rock music in today's era of music is being given the spotlight it deserves, or is it kind of falling down the rankings a little bit?
It depends what you define as rock. I think there's a lot of things. You only have to go onto iTunes and look in the category of rock to see that things are not really classified as... Things are classified as rock that aren't necessarily rock music. Is it something that's sonic and audible rock music, or is it something that is easy to categorize in a record shop, or is it something that's easy to like put on a t-shirt and market to people? I think, it has its sort of rightful place. I mean, the music industry is changing so fast. Time, and the genres are kind of meshing into each other. And I think, if anything, it's not like everything is so defined as it used to be. Things are kind of albums and artists have elements of all kinds of genres of music now. So things are becoming a bit more of an amalgamation.
Okay, cool. So moving into just another couple of questions. Kat Hendry has asked, people obviously have a lot more time on their hands at the moment, and especially more time to learn hobbies, etc. For those people who are out there who maybe are just wanting to pick up an instrument, whether that be bass, whether that be guitar, do you have any recommendations for where's the best place to actually start learning?
Well, picking up a bass first thing, just getting the instrument, getting a small little amp. My first recommendation, especially in this kind of time where you can't physically get to spend time with a teacher, is to sit and learn some of the bass lines to your favorite records, or learn some of the guitarists to your favorite records. There's so much online and on YouTube. There's an amazing bass teacher online called Derek Bennett, who has a YouTube channel. He has a Instagram thing as well. And his lessons are really, really good. I actually follow him just for some inspiration sometimes. And lots of people in bands and guitarists and musicians are making themselves more available online as well. But I would start, if you're a bass player, start listening to like Sister Sledge or The Meters, or, some of the old Motown stuff. Bass lines that are kind of quite simple to learn, but really melodic. The same applies for guitar. I would try and rely on your ears as much as possible. Teach yourself. You don't necessarily have to go out and learn all the theory and all the modes and scales. Just learn how to play something by ear first.
Awesome. So I've just been given the 2-minute warning. So with that, we've probably got time for one more question. So the next question is actually from the photos that showed in the podcast. It seems that you have quite a love for Fender. Is that fair to say? What is it? If you could summarize that, what is it about Fender that you enjoy so much?
I think it's just a classic, incredibly well-designed bass that lots of people have copied. And the thing about Fender is that they do a bit of everything. They're really good for touring because they're almost impossible to break. They're solid, like a good workhorse. And they do, they've got lots of different neck profiles, so there's kind of something that fits everyone. They do a jazz or precision and 5-string, 4-string. But to me, it's kind of the Fender is synonymous with the sound of bass, so to speak. You only have to look through all pictures of history music books to see how many people played a Fender Precision, and it wasn't that did it for me. I just I've gone through loads of different basses, like lots of brands, lots of different kind of sounds, pickups, different wood, all kinds of thing, and I've always arrived back at Fender P bass. I love the tone, I love the playability, I love the look of it. It's not too complicated, you know, there's no crazy active tone circuitry going on. It's got a natural sound. You can use a pick and make it super punky. You can use fingers and make it kind of softer and more muted. You can put flat ones on it, make it sound like James Jameson. You know, I just love the versatility of them and their simplicity.
Perfect. So actually, that does actually bring us right to the end of the 10 minutes. So Simone, thank you so much for being on the Q&A with us. I hope everyone who's watched has loved it and enjoyed it as much as I have. But until next time, thank you for joining us.
All right, stay safe, everyone.